So I can start off with a brief introduction of myself and Atland for anyone who's unfamiliar. Introductions as well. So I'm Ava. I'm the current VP of Platform at Atland Ventures, current junior at the Carlson School of Management studying finance and entrepreneurial management. As for a background on Atland, Atland Ventures is a student-run venture fund at the University of Minnesota. It's made up of students from the university, but it's not affiliated with the university, and we're the first for-profit student-run venture firm. So really excited to get started. Feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat about Atland or anything throughout the presentation. We're going to have some time at the end for Q&A, but drop those questions in whenever you have them. So without further ado, feel free to introduce yourselves.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I can go ahead and start us off. So hey everyone, it is great to be here on behalf of Atland Ventures today. My name is Aditya. I am a rising junior at the University of Minnesota, studying computer engineering. So I have a little bit more of a technical background, but since as a Gen Z based fund, since we look at a whole variety of verticals, it really comes in handy pretty often. I'm currently an analyst at Atland Ventures. And the industry or trend that I'll be speaking on behalf of today is agriculture and agritech. And a little bit about my own passions is I'm really interested in Internet of Things. So I have experience working on the entire end-to-end system, from collecting data on the hardware side to actually publishing that data and pulling it from the cloud in a very intuitive way so that users can actually use that data. And also sort of the inspiration for agriculture in general is at my parents' house we have a garden, so it is very, very important throughout the year to make sure that the amount of water we place on the field is the right amount so that the plants that we're growing can get the most optimal harvest. So there's a lot of applications for this, and I'm going to be very happy to speak about it as we go forward.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. Excuse my voice. I have a bit of a cold, so if you see me blowing my nose, that's why. But my name's Elise Riniker. I am a junior as well here at the University of Minnesota, majoring in marketing, and I'm an analyst in Atland Ventures, and just coming up on a year as an analyst. So actually, Aditya, Ava, Sophia, and I were all in the same cohort. So excited for that anniversary. And my industry of interest today is sustainability. And since it's such a broad industry, specifically within sustainability, I am most interested in the climate tech and the food tech spaces. And I'm really interested in this industry because it shows that those who really concentrate on it have the ability to improve the environment, and from that improve people's quality of life. And with the overlooming threat of the climate crisis, I think that it's focusing on this industry is all the more important to keep an eye on.
Great. Yeah, Sophia, you want to go next?
Hi. Hello, I'm Sophia. I'm a rising sophomore at the University of Minnesota studying industrial engineering. In Atland, I am both a director and VP of recruitment. So I kind of do both. And my area of specialty today is e-commerce. I'm personally drawn to e-commerce because I guess, you love what you know. And I think that as a young Gen Zer, I've grown up shopping. All my friends have grown up shopping online, and we grew up with the rise of Amazon and eBay and so many others. So it's something that I've seen from a young age, and I've gotten to see grow in several different ways, which I'll talk about today. So.
All right, I guess that leaves me. My name is Brendan. I'm a senior at the University of Minnesota, and I'll be speaking about sports, the sports industry, and also Web3 today. I've been in Atland for, I think it's started my third year, so pretty experienced with what we do here. A little bit about my background. I work for a pretty big sports media company called Overtime. On our social media team, I was filming games, helping decide what we post, kind of social strategy, but also working on our Web3 project and really trying to build community there. I've worked at Techstars, the Techstars Sports Accelerator, and then also obviously with Atland, getting that venture perspective and more entrepreneur side. So yeah, excited to be here today, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Great. Yeah. Awesome panel and some really cool industries we're going to get a deeper dive into. So I guess without further ado, why don't you all start out kind of explaining, so as a Gen Z student, what excites you most about the industry that you're talking about today? We can start with Elise if you'd like and go in that same order.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ava. So as a Gen Z student, I think because the sustainability industry is so broad that it really makes me most excited about being part of Gen Z, which is like a generation that holds brands and companies accountable and at a higher expectations to practice sustainable business than generations past. And it's a pretty known statistic that actually 3/4 of Gen Z value sustainability more than brand name. And that is something that I practice, that many of my friends practice, and that's just really exciting to me to see our generation really take initiative in sustainability.
Great. Yeah. Aditya, you want to talk to us about ag tech a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of like the most important things about Gen Z is that I think, are generally a lot more sort of up for some, new technologies, a lot more adaptable. And something that we actually see a lot in ag tech right now is that we're kind of at like a watershed moment, if you want to say. Currently, at least in many verticals, especially when it comes to growing crops, a lot of things have been very, very constant throughout the years, right? You have farm cooperatives that report to larger corporations based on their needs, whether that be dairy products or wheat. But unfortunately, it is very, very difficult to optimize some of those processes without technology. And that is kind of where technology comes into place, trying to bring more tech in and trying to see, how we can save more water, kind of like what Elise said about sustainability. That is like super, super important. But obviously there is, when it comes to actually moving this industry forward and this sort of concept of change, there's definitely a lot of setbacks, right? Farmers definitely tend to be a lot more tech adverse, whether it's a lot more harder to implement tech in remote areas, or the cost. That is a very, very big thing. Trying to get these devices to cost less and to be very, very easy to work with from a user interface perspective is super, super important to make sure that farmers are comfortable using it. Because at the end of the day, right, your solution should be adopted. And if there's a high barrier to entry to adopting a technological device, whether that be a sensor on a field, no one's going to buy it. So that is, I think, what makes me really excited, because from a Gen Z standpoint, I think we generally understand that it is very important from like a user interface perspective to make things usable. And that is what excites me about the industry.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Definitely a great point, and something that we're definitely helping making strides towards. Brendan, you want to talk to us a little bit about sports and Web3?
Yeah, so I'll start with sports, and I have kind of like a business answer and more personal answer. Business answer is, I think sports as a whole is usually, when there's a new technology that comes out, sports is usually one of the first industries that tries to adopt it and tries like different ways of kind of implementing this technology. Web3 is a great example, but also just in general. I've also, through my experience with Overtime, I mean, we are a super, super innovative company. Like, everybody at the company is like in their 20s and 30s, or like the majority of people, I guess. And it's just super cool, kind of building on the forefront of sports and also new technology. So that's kind of the business reason. What excites me. Personal reason is, I mean, I grew up playing basketball. Like, I love all these sports. Every like weekend, I'm always watching everything. So yeah, I mean, just having the opportunity to kind of be like in the midst of everything that's going on, and just like enjoy it as a fan, but also from business perspective is super cool, and that excites me a lot.
Awesome. Yeah. Last but not least, Sophia.
Yeah, I think I also, same as Brendan, have kind of a business answer and then like a personal answer. I'll start out with a personal testament. So I think, like I said earlier, you know what you love and you love what you know. And I talked to several friends today about like the e-commerce industry and like their buying habits online. And they're like, oh my gosh, we love how personalized everything is online. Our online experience is curated to what we enjoy based off of what we interact with on several platforms. And a lot of things like TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, Google, the algorithm gets to know what we like as a person. And so I'm super excited about within the industry, the continuation of that and what new things are going to be curated because of it. So you'll have like a larger market of maybe like young 20-year-old girls, but within each subcategory, there's going to be 10 to 15 different aesthetics that are in. And then based off of that, brands and communities online are built off of those things on platforms like Tumblr's not so much in anymore, but like think of like a Tumblr like aesthetic. And so or like the clean girl aesthetic, when you have communities built off of sub niche interests, Gen Z really seems to take a hold of communities and then continue to buy and invest in those communities as they're interested in it. So I think it's interesting just how it's continuing and what like niche sub brands are popping up because of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think our generation values community more than many others. And that's definitely a pattern we'll see continuing into the future. Thanks, guys, for those like brief introductions. As for the point of kind of where the future is going of the space as well, for ag tech, Aditya, I'm kind of curious to know how you see ag tech evolving to help with sustainability initiative in the near future.
So a really, really interesting thing actually about that question, Alva, is that I think a lot of people think that when we consider from a business standpoint, companies working on developing technology to help farmers, I think generally there's this sentiment that, the business side of trying to, get technology out there and getting it to work with how the farmers' needs are kind of goes against maybe sustainability goals. But I actually disagree with that. I think that both sustainability as well as the people working really tirelessly on the computer and technology end to get these things out there, I think they go hand in hand and actually complement each other. The reason I say that is when we look at what each side is trying to accomplish, you'll see that there's a lot of similarities, right? When we talk about technology, what we're really interested in is optimizing things, how to make things easier, how to collect data faster, transmit it faster, and do something very cool with it. And then when we consider sustainability, you'll also see the same idea. We're trying to save water. We're trying to save resources, right? By 2050, they say that the world's population is going to go up to like 10 billion. And that is going to put a lot of pressure on our current agriculture infrastructure to sort of keep up with that growth, right? We still want to make sure we're able to distribute food and actually make sure our supply chains don't break because of all the extra pressure we're putting on it. So that is kind of what I have to say about that. And actually tying this maybe a little bit to Atland specifically, one of our sort of tenements in our thesis is actually human-computer interaction, or HCI. That is a very, very big thing because, again, like I sort of mentioned earlier, people sort of see technology as like a cold, hard, distinct thing. It is not at all, right? Technology is supposed to work with people, and that is what human-computer interaction is. And sort of as a fund, we actually look at that when we're doing our diligence. We look at whether companies are working with their target users. Is the technology they're building actually solving a tangible goal, and do they have stuff to actually back that up? So that's just something I wanted to mention, and that's very, very important. And if you look in the chat, you can actually see a little bit more about our investment thesis.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Aditya. Definitely agree with some of those points. And it's a misconception that technology as a whole by itself and can't be intermingled with other things. And I think we're seeing that popularized more and more in recent days, and we'll continue seeing that into the future. Brendan and Elise, I know there's been some controversy, especially around Web3. I know there's been some discussion around the sustainability industry itself. So curious to know, what are some of the biggest challenges you see those industries experiencing at the moment?
I can start. So for Web3, NFT stuff, whatever you want to call it, the biggest challenge is probably fraud, and like there's a lot of money laundering that goes on, and like almost every project that starts up, the problem with like publicly marketing like a Discord or like whatever your marketing vehicle is there's always going to be like a lot of bad characters that come in, and every time there's some kind of NFT launch, there's always, scams, and this is a real thing. Like people lose a lot of money. So there's that. And then the other challenge is kind of like the energy side of, how much power do, like, I know like in the early days with like Bitcoin mining and stuff, took a lot of energy, and slowly, there's new iterations of different cryptocurrencies, but also, as we saw with the Ethereum merge, like there's slowly progress being made in terms of energy consumption, and that ties a lot in with the sustainability aspect as well. So I'll pass it over to Elise.
Yeah, of course. So I think for the sustainability industry, I kind of came up with two big challenges, one at a more wider scale and one more at an individual level, just because it is so broad and there are definitely some challenges. So on a wider scale, I think that a big challenge that faces this industry is that there isn't one universal definition of sustainability and how to measure it, as it affects so many different aspects of our society, economy, government, institutions, and how each of those interact with the natural environment. It's hard to come up with one thing, especially across countries and nations. And because of that, there's also a huge lack of mandatory reporting, especially in the United States. But I think we are on a turn where that is becoming more regulated and normalized. And then on an individual level, the lack of emphasis that an individual can make, I think that there needs to be more emphasis on this, and it can be easy for an individual to be discouraged from starting to incorporate sustainability into their everyday lives, or how they shop, because it can be difficult to realize the difference that just one person can make when there isn't necessarily one concrete, easy way for someone to start. And so I actually wanted to give a shout out to a startup that I talked to last year that kind of helps with this problem. I'm going to drop their link I'll pull up their website after I'm done talking about them and drop it in the chat so people can check them out. But they're called Ren.co or Ren Company. And I think they're a great example of empowering an individual to really make that change in their own everyday lives. So Ren is a platform where they calculate your own personal carbon footprint month over month or year over year, and it allows someone like me to offset my own personal carbon footprint through a subscription that I pay monthly that goes to funding their portfolio of projects that help offset emissions around the world. And on their website, you can actually check out the current projects. They do about 5 or 6 at a time. But yeah, just like a really cool company that's addressing one of those big issues. So I will drop their website in the chat. I wanted to give them a little shout out.
That's super cool, Elise. Definitely something I'll have to check out myself. Really cool how so many advancements are being made, and while there's some challenges in the space, I'm sure they'll be remedied in the future in some shape or way. Moving on. So as we all know, we recently have lived through a pandemic. Not sure if it's done yet. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we're getting around to the other side. Sophia, with the e-commerce and shopping space, interested to hear your take on how you believe the pandemic has impacted traditional methods of commerce and how you see that impact extending into the future.
Oh, well, I have a lot of hot takes on this one. So we all lived through a pandemic, quite obviously. And Gen Z, in the numbers, was buying a lot. Their buying power increased significantly, especially not only like younger Gen Z kids like getting access to phones, but suddenly we're on our computers and phones all day long. Any web browser page could be full of e-commerce websites. One thing that I noticed was not only me, but my peers had trouble kind of understanding what was it like to be a part of a brand and a part of a community during that time. So a lot of us like were drawn to very curated influencers and people and videos and communities that would be built. So like, let's take your average Instagram or TikTok influencer. The more that they would establish kind of a brand around themselves during COVID, especially, we really flocked to those communities, and we decided to buy. Maybe our influencer was wearing something or said something about a coffee bean. We'd immediately be drawn to that. So I think after a while, though, with COVID and what kind of happened was that a lot of brands kind of fell off. There wasn't a whole lot of brand retention once people realized and could see through a lot of like fake communities being built online, and what is it like to be an online consumer. People really challenged that after we started to get back into person. And so I personally think that during COVID, one thing we saw was maybe, the rise of online, but to continue that and to continue sustaining a lot of those brands, it's going to take a lot more in-person events and whatnot. And one particular one that's one of my favorites is like Mad Happy. You have like very exclusive drops and in-person events, but also very curated, tasteful online experience as well. So
that's super interesting. I know there's a lot of takes right now really sticking to the fact that technology and commerce is going to become increasingly digital, which I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't think you do either, but it's also interesting to see how that in-person aspect is so important in order to maintain those communities. Similar to that note on technology, I'm kind of curious, Sophia and Aditya, how you think the two industries that you're interested in can be further advanced with technology in the near future. Both of those, I think, are increasingly moving towards that space. So curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I sort of mentioned a big portion of, this whole idea of optimization a little bit earlier. I see the, future of this industry sort of really moving towards vertical farms, more climate controlled conditions. And that's sort of how the industry will be advanced. The reason I think this is going to be a lot more common is one thing you'll notice is that most people, live in cities actually, right? But at the same time, if there's a lot of people in the same spot, what happens? There's not a lot of space left. So you sort of, as the space reduces, the only way to actually build farms and sort of help, actually move food locally is to build upwards, right? So, build vertically, which is really the idea of vertical farms. But I think it goes more than also sort of optimizing, how close our food is. I think it also goes towards being able to sort of control a lot of the characteristics of our food. So there's actually a company in Japan called Mir AI, which actually developed a lettuce that has more potassium in it. So I dropped the link to the sort of vertical farm that they're working on there in the chat. But essentially, since they're lettuce, they were able to control the growing conditions in a lot more of a climate control setting in their vertical farm. They were able to, get more potassium, more nutrients by sort of adjusting what actually goes through the water that feeds the plants. And what they were able to do is they were actually able to provide the lettuce to local hospitals where people might have some nutrient deficiencies or need potassium, right, as part of their care. So you can see that customizability is a really, really big part, like how we can actually, use food to our advantage to, support certain, deficiencies, and also just get the most out of, our food, because it is very important to, make sure that we're very efficient when we have a larger and larger population to support, and there's a lot more logistics behind, getting farms to work, right? As that gets harder and harder with a lot more agribusiness sort of moving towards conglomerates and sort of larger structures. You don't really have the concept of like an individual farm as much. So it's very important to be efficient and, be able to support a lot of people. So that's just my brief thoughts on that area.
I'll go. So I'd say for specifically e-commerce, it's not about necessarily creating new technology. It's about creating new ways that we interact with that technology. So on any e-commerce website, if you have more videos, Gen Z is going to be a lot more inclined to watch and interact and participate. If there's like videos and other colorful things on there, we have a very short attention span right now. So the more efficient those algorithms are and the data aggregation is going to be, the more powerful an e-commerce platform will be.
Yeah, both really interesting points. I had no idea that I could get potassium from lettuce. That is an awesome point, Aditya. It's so cool to see how that space is moving towards so many new technologies. And Sophia too, could not agree more. Our attention span is slowly diminishing a little by little, but I also think like having different ways to play on that is super important, especially within the space. Elise, with sustainability, I know there's been a lot of skepticism around kind of the climate crisis. So I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on how you believe startups are addressing those concerns and how, despite them, they're continuing to push for their initiatives around sustainability.
Yeah, great question. I definitely think it's hard to exactly pinpoint how they're addressing skeptics, because I feel like, without getting too political, skeptics
All right, Elise might be cutting out a little bit. We'll give her a second or else we'll come back to her point. I'm sure it's going to be great. Okay, no problem. Why don't we shift gears to Brendan while Elise's connection gets a little bit stronger? Brendan, I've heard there's a lot of talk around Web3 and it being in all of our lives and being embedded within many different aspects in the future. I'm kind of curious to know how you think that's going to happen and what specific areas of our life do we think that Web3 can be the most prominent in?
Yeah, so this is, at the end of the day, this is all about like building community. And I think the simplest way to kind of think about this is, how do we take like a Web 2 audience who, for, over time specifically, people who follow us for basketball highlights and, football and stuff like that. How do we take that and kind of build like a more curated experience? And I think like for Web3 as a whole, it's like it's a way for, brands, companies, people to separate, people who are super fans or really want to support somebody, and the general, scroll on Instagram, see whatever type of audience. So, and with the whole blockchain technology and being able to like verify specifically through an NFT, like you're able to kind of create distinction between, kind of it's almost like a hierarchy of your supporters. So that's one thing. Big thing about Web3 is building communities, which I think our future will be dictated through. In terms of like public adoption, it's going to take time, right? Like having Web3 and whatnot being embedded in our lives. And by the way, I hate using the word Web3. Like it doesn't really mean anything. It's kind of like a overarching term, but for the purpose of this, I'll just say Web3. But public adoption of this kind of stuff is going to take a long time. Even something like Bitcoin, right? It's been through the trials and tribulations over whatever years, but it's still like incredibly volatile, and it's not really a safe thing. Well, that's debatable, but like this type of thing is still very volatile. So it's going to take a long time for companies and people to start accepting this. But at the end of the day, it's not really about a picture of an NFT or anything. It's about the technology that's going to stay. And a lot of it is really getting over those challenges, right? Like I mentioned in the previous question, I'm asking like, what are the challenges of the space? That's a big one. Also, like a lot of the people falling for these, scams or whatnot are kind of on the younger side. So we have to kind of get over that. I will also add, though, is the people innovating and building companies in this space are also kind of Gen Z or maybe even a little bit older. So we are familiar with the people building companies are familiar with the pitfalls that might come with this. So we're also positioned to like create long-lasting technologies and companies. So but I guess short answer, it will take a long time for Web3 to be embedded in our lives. But yeah, I think it will happen, and we are on our way to do so.
I can piggyback off of Brendan. One personal conviction that I have is that in the long term, I think a lot of the young Gen Z trendy e-commerce websites are going to be the ones that can bridge the gap, like I said earlier, between online experiences and in real life experiences, and that includes digital art, NFTs, other things bought and sold on the blockchain, whatever that'll look like in the future. I think it's definitely something that we need to have slowly being adapted and adopted, getting rid of all the junk and the hype projects and the quick drops and with no community built around it. But I think there's a few awesome tastemakers in the space. Like Basic Space is one of my favorites. They not only have an online NFT marketplace, but they have a personally curated marketplace bought and sold with big names like Naomi Osaka and a few other I think Steven I don't know, there's just a few other NBA players I know that use the Basic Space, but I absolutely love the curation that comes with having both the Web3 aspect of the e-commerce space.
Totally. Yeah, that's really good perspectives on both ends. And I'm kind of sure, I'm curious to see how that's going to shift in the future, especially as Web3 becomes more adopted and younger generations start that development as well, on Brendan's note. Looks like Elise is having some technical issues. Her network might have gone down on her end. So we can kind of wrap it up with one final question on our end. We wanted to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I'm sure you're all very curious to hear the panel's perspectives. So this one's for everyone. So as a Gen Z student, is there something in this industry that you see becoming prevalent in the next 10 years that might not be talked about now? Sophia, you can start us off if you'd like.
I feel like I already kind of touched on this with the adaptation of Web3 and NFTs into the e-commerce, but I'll let Brennan and Aditya kind of take this one.
I could start us off with agriculture. So I've been kind of going off on sort of tech and the industry sort of, being a lot more shaped by tech. But I think something that, I started seeing this trend a little bit more, but even just being in the suburbs and sort of going around, the block, I started seeing this a lot more. And that is that I think it's going to be a lot more common to see smaller gardens and people actually starting to build their own sort of individual plots or little gardens that they can sort of, nurture. And even maybe in the cities too, you see this trend of, if you go to a lot of large supermarkets, you can get little herb trays that you can place on the windowsill. So I think that is going to be a trend that people aren't really, I guess, talking about that much, but seeing people start to maybe grow things a lot more locally, whether that be, again, about more sustainability conscious population, or just in general having the it makes you feel happy to sort of grow your own stuff, honestly, from my own personal experience. So I definitely think that will be a lot more common, and I think something to honestly look forward to, because generally it was sort of seen that agriculture, was mainly taken care of by a very small group, right? For most of the population, we were able to get so efficient to the point, right, through technology and sort of a lot of developments in horticulture, that we didn't really need to worry about it as a population in general. But I think it will definitely, ease the burden of current farmers to, grow things a lot more locally that we can, so that the things that we source can be done more efficiently, and we don't have to worry about inefficiencies in sort of how we do our supply chain stuff. So that's just my little thoughts on agriculture.
But you're gonna have to remind me with the question. I was looking for the link for our NFT project, but yeah, can you remind me of the question?
Yeah, no problem. We're just kind of curious to hear, as a Gen Z student, is there something in the industry that you see becoming prevalent in the next 10 years that might not be talked about right now?
As a young person, yeah, I mean, I think the big thing about being involved in Atland and being Gen Z as a whole is kind of the perspective change, right? For Atland, having the experience of being and being able to put on the investor hat and evaluate different companies, whether it's the companies I worked with at Techstars, right? There were it was a sports accelerator, but there were Web3 companies, and sports tech and like sports data company, like all different across the spectrum of this intersection here. So having the experience of being an investor and being able to evaluate that way, but also as a potential customer, really has helped. Yeah, and I think this space, like sports and Web3 both, are filled with young people. It's exciting, right? Like everybody has probably played sports at one point in their life. And when the whole NFT thing was blowing up in 2020, 2021, largely dominated by people who are not only young, but love alternative investing and things of that nature. So, I mean, as we continue to, as time continues to pass, is like, I feel that, young people will decide kind of where this space goes, and we're positioned to do well because, I mean, there's a lot of pros of this technology, like transparency, the communities being built. It feels really authentic. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I directly answered the question, Ava, but I think yeah, young people are positioned very well to take this space where it will go.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for those answers, guys. I definitely agree to the point that a lot of this new future is going to be driven by our generation. And I'm sure people like you guys who are passionate about the spaces that are going to take a huge turn just a few years down the line. Looks like Elise is trying to restart her router. She will hopefully be back with us. Once she's back, we can ask her the question about sustainability and some skepticism around it, as well as close it off with that final question. But for now, why don't we open the floor to some questions from the audience? Really curious to hear your guys' thoughts and any questions that you might want to ask the panel.
I actually see a question in the chat from Sanwu. I think it was addressed to both Elise and I about the startup companies we found. So she was just wondering, how did we find them? The Japanese company I linked, I was doing a lot of research actually in vertical farms, mainly because, and this is maybe a little bit of a shameless plug, I was actually working on an application that would potentially be useful for vertical farms, which is like an IoT-based device. And additionally, the thing is, like, I was also really interested in potentially, marketing that kind of device to something like, Mirai AI in the future. And a lot of that sort of motivation actually came from Atland, basically. So coming from a little bit more of a technical background, I wasn't as sure how to really build a business plan, for instance, but a lot of our diligence pipeline is actually, analyzing companies and really critiquing different verticals. And I was able to get a lot of experience working with business plans and really working with founders. And through that, actually, I was really motivated to sort of go out and look for companies like these to, reach out to, even collaborate with, because that's what this industry is. That's the fun part about this industry, collaboration. So that's how I would answer that question.
Looks like there's another one for Aditya. So how did you, a little bit of a glitch there on my end. How do you think robotics is impacting the agritech? And is Atland currently invested in any agtech or startups or looking to get involved in the future?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So the robotics component, again, I've definitely looked into this a lot more, especially through working on a smaller, compact data logger for farms. I was really thinking, why aren't robotics as common as you'd expect? And by robotics, I'm assuming you're talking about like autonomous vehicles. They're called AUVs in the industry. Another set of robotics people sometimes get confused with is something that one of a lawnmower company, I believe it was John Deere. Yeah, there it is, John Deere. They were working on harvesters that are driverless, but they're still in the sense controlled by someone remotely. But considering just both of those aspects, the thing about robotics is robots have a lot of different software and hardware components that go into building it. And that actually just raises the expense of these robots a lot, which makes it very hard from maybe like an individual farmer's perspective, considering there might not be whether support in the larger cooperative for sort of widespread robot use. It's just the expense. They're very, very expensive. And the other thing is they're not passive, right? Like there still would require some amount of supervision, or if not supervision, you still want to make sure that your investment is not doing something it shouldn't be doing on the farm. But I think even the biggest thing, as I'm sort of spitballing here, the biggest issue, honestly, is that human-robot interaction. So very similar to human-computer interaction, human-robot interaction is like another space. I've done some research in that actually through a underwater robotics lab here at the U of M. Human-robot interaction is very, very complicated. And, generally speaking, again, talking about farmers who may generally be more tech adverse, making these robots something they, enjoy working with can be very difficult, such as, mimicking eye gazes. That's a very common thing. Or just having them, do what farmers expect them to do, user interface design problem. So there's a lot of stuff that sort of go into this soup, so to speak. And it's very hard to get the ingredients timed correctly as an analogy. So.
Great. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that changes in the future with some more advancements in the space. Another question. So this one you guys all might be able to tag team together. What are a few traits, in your opinions, that characterize Gen Z, and how traits apply to the choices that Gen Z consumers make? Actually, might be more targeted a little bit towards Sophia, so you can start it out. But
yeah, I'll start it out. Thank you, Ava. I know Elise may not be here, but I can definitely tag team off of her sustainability topic. Gen Z is wanting to be sustainable. I hear from a lot of my friends, I want to compost. I want to not have plastic trash bags. I want to be more conscious and ethical with what clothes I'm buying and where I'm buying things from. I think a lot in schools now, we have a lot of classes that talk about, okay, this is like the process of producing a good, and this is who does it too. And so knowing that our labor going into like maybe even the coffee beans or the clothing is ethical, that's something that we really value. Yeah. So, and I think that we're drawn towards brands that are maybe more locally sourced, locally made. Farmers markets, I know, are becoming a new up and coming thing in Gen Z culture. Shopping at thrift stores and being sustainable with who and where we buy our clothes from, even if it may be from not a sustainable brand. If we're getting it secondhand, that's for some reason, some may disagree with it being more sustainable, but is definitely more sustainable in our eyes. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sophia. I think a lot of these industries actually intermingle more than we think, and that's a great example of how sustainability is really driving the change in commerce and all the other spaces as well. Before we jump to the next question, Elise, you're back. Glad to see it. Glad to hear it.
Sorry.
No worries. Technical issues happen. I'm sure we're all aware with this past year with Zoom. We were on the topic of kind of a little bit of skepticism around the space, but more on the idea of how these startups are kind of addressing that and pushing forward with their initiatives. You want to help finish up that point super quick?
Right. Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure where I cut off. My router totally died. But I think along the lines of what I was saying is that in addressing this skepticism and continuing to push for sustainability, that startups are really leading the way and are the major industry leaders in comparisons to major established corporations who aren't able to be as agile or make changes as quickly or implement them as quickly. And for example, startups can really be sustainable from day one and implementing ESG policies that can be embedded into every part of their business. And with startups that are able to do this, being smaller companies, it's really setting the stage for up and coming new companies and keeping major established corporations accountable as well. And many startups are also more conscious of making a positive and environmental impact. And actually something that I've also experienced as an investor within Atland is that startups are increasingly having to report their performance and their sustainable practice to investors. And maybe that is the make or break in getting that investment. And that's something that I make sure to ask companies that we are doing diligence on in that realm as well. But just all in all, just greater transparency and accountability in the space is really all that startups and companies can do in this space without being too invasive or pressurizing their views.
Definitely, yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see how some new laws being made are going to impact that as well in the future. Definitely think the whole world is starting to make that initiative. Great. And then super quick, before we head back to our Q&A, we ask the panel one final question to round out the conversation, which you can answer now as well. So as a Gen Z student, is there something in sustainability that you see becoming prevalent in 10 years that might not be talked about now?
Yeah, I think for me, I would say the increase focus on something called digital sustainability. So as technology is continually getting more advanced, a theme of sustainable digitalization or making a digital transformation where companies can make all of their business processes and supply chain more eco-conscious. And I think this is a movement that has been gaining traction around the world and will be really important in combating climate change as it enables digital solutions as well as not only physical. But I think that a lot of the trends that will be seen in the next 10 years have already started to be part of the conversation. And so that is something that I'm excited to see, that digital transformation within the industry as a whole.
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how those develop, as well as different trends we're seeing become popularized now. I'm sure will continue and expand in the future, especially with our generation's push. So back to the Q&A. We have around 10 minutes left, so feel free to close to the chat. So this one's for Sophia as well. When it comes to shopping habits, do you see Gen Z shifting away from traditional sites like Amazon, big box retailers, and doing research directly on brand websites? And what do you personally look for on brand websites to build trust with the consumer if it's a new and upcoming brand?
I can break this into two parts, first question and then second. So yes, short answer, yes, very much so. Gen Z is wanting to shift away from Amazon and big box retailers. As Elise was talking about with sustainability, it's easier for Gen Z to look at a larger company like Amazon, many parts with the whole process of, how does a package get to my door from where it was manufactured, and say, okay, this isn't ethical, this isn't ethical, this isn't ethical. And not just on the basis of ethics, but in the basis of like building a community. What's it like to be a part of a brand and a part of a culture in a world where we can't always see each other in person, so we're wanting to do it online. I personally have seen a large growth in like in-person pop-ups. One particular influencer who I think has done a great job, for example, with this movement is Indie Blue. So she's a niche online influencer. I don't even know how many followers she has anymore, but she went absolutely viral for not only her content, but her ability to create a brand, bringing herself and her image, but making like a pop-up store in Utah where she's from. And I'll plug that in the chat. And it's a grocery store. Who would have thought that so many young Gen Z people would be interested in shopping at a grocery store themed clothing site? So yes, pop-ups are in. Amazon and big box retailers are out very much so. The second part of the question, what do you personally look for in a brand, on brand websites to build trust with a consumer if it's a new and upcoming brand? Once again, back to influencers. I hate to continue on with influencers, but they're really a huge part of the Gen Z culture and lifestyle on TikTok, on YouTube, and on Instagram, three main platforms that I know most of us in Atland use almost every single day. If there's an influencer who gives it a shout out or has verified it in any way, I know that we're a lot more drawn to buying from those. and seeing our peers like on TikTok and YouTube wearing the clothes, buying the items, shopping at certain places online. We want what other people want, and we want to be a part of that world. So even if we may not like it as an individual, if we see an overexposure of the community around us, obviously buying those things, we're going to buy them naturally. And specifically with up and coming brands that are younger and smaller, when you have an influencer that's tacked onto it that can verify it in any way, shape, or form, we're obviously drawn to it. Another one that does a good job on this spin is Thing Testing. I think personally does an excellent job on this. It's a website where you can see a bunch of different brands, discover a bunch of smaller things everywhere from like little niche like rings and whatnot to maybe a new coffee bean. Then you're able to scroll through and see what everyone's comments and ratings are on it. So once again, we want what other people want when we know that that's what our peers have and are drawn towards. So.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good point, Sophia. I definitely think that our communication as a generation as a whole is becoming a lot more intertwined, and we're trusting each other's opinions more and more on different things in commerce and even outside. The next question is, what is the biggest hurdle which you think currently stunts society's potential for maximum innovation? Kind of a heavy hitter.
I think we should save that one for last. I think the next two I actually saw in the chat, or Ben had put the question in chat a while ago. So I think we should.
Okay, yeah.
Those are also related.
Great.
They're also related. So I think we'll skip.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks for that, Brendan.
Yeah.
That's nice. Paying attention to the chat, I've been paying attention to Q&A. So definitely, why don't we move on to Ben's comment then? What doors are uniquely open to you as Gen Z investors? And are there any ways that you feel disconnected from investment opportunities? That can probably be tag teamed by you all. I think that goes for any industry we're talking about.
Yeah, I'll start off with this. So one of Atland's biggest value adds is actually that like we're students and we have a unique perspective on the problems that these companies are saying they're solving a Gen Z problem, right? Well, we have that actual perspective and we can evaluate in another way that maybe a traditional or maybe a bigger VC firm can't. Like we have that unique perspective. Is this actually a problem in Gen Z? Is this something that we face every day? So we have that perspective for one. Number two, so a lot of these companies, they want access to students, whether it's surveys, marketing, stuff like that. We have a pipeline for that. We all have friends, stuff like that. So that's a second value add. Third one, what we commonly say is we place like a lot of interns at these companies. And we'll speak to over the course of a semester hundreds of founders and stuff. So we have a pretty good pipeline for that. In terms of ways that we feel disconnected, there definitely are a few. The main one is our check size, which is still 25K, 30K. Sometimes we might do more depending on the deal, but we are sometimes limited by that. Getting into the competitive deals, a lot of these companies are looking for something a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, it's double-edged, right? Like we do still get into competitive deals just because we are one of the only student funds. So yeah, that's kind of my answer for that.
Great. Yeah, it's interesting to see how having us, like to your point, having sometimes Atland on an investor's cap table is basically a validation of the market that they're trying to cover as well. So yeah, super great point and great question. Next we have, does everyone in Atland pick a topic to focus on predominantly or is everyone on this conference call researching multiple ventures? Again, we can probably tag team this one. Feel free, whoever wants to respond.
I had a few thoughts on this one, Roman. So the main thing is when we actually put the fund together and sort of have our investment discussions, we're looking at students who are super motivated, but also have like very, very interesting passions. So a lot of us actually sort of come in with maybe some sort of insight or some passion that we already had beforehand. And then through Atland, we're able to sort of develop that a lot more and really, get access to more insights from some of the companies we look through. So that is like really the main idea. So each of us sort of have our own sort of particular specialty, and that is sort of like when we're working together as a fund, we're able to sort of contribute those little bits of information so we can like really make good investment decisions. So that's how I'd answer that. But if there's any other thoughts on that, that'd definitely be cool to hear.
Definitely, yeah. Cool way to not only expand your knowledge on the space that you're interested in, but also expose yourself to other industries and be a part of the investment discussions around a variety of sectors. I think we have time for one more. I know we're running up on time. So Michael asks, what kind of minimum investment does Atland look for from an individual investor? Has your team attempted to make venture investing accessible to more people in Gen Z, or is the audience too early in their career to frequently invest? Anybody want to take this one? Or else I'm happy to kind of touch on it as well. As for a minimum investment that we look for from an individual investor, that can vary. Sometimes it's between, usually we only really ask for investments from individuals when we're raising our funds. Usually the people who would invest in Atland range not normally Gen Z, unless you're really well off in your career. That's awesome if you can afford to make an investment into Atland. A minimum check size usually lands at around 50 to 25K. So we love to make investing. I think the way that I would frame we make venture investing accessible to more people in Gen Z are our fund members. So those are the people actually making those investments, maybe the people who invest into us. I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly, if that's what you mean, but LPs in our fund most likely won't land in that Gen Z range, but they enable people within the Gen Z audience and generation to learn more about VC at such a young age. So I'm not sure if any of you have anything to add to that at all.
Yeah, I'll add on here. So Atland's been around actually for, I think 2016 maybe is when it started. And at that time, like Atland was, I think either the first or maybe the second like venture fund, student-run venture fund, and actually we are one of the only ones that where the students get carried. And so, as kind of we hit like 2018, 2019, we saw like a lot of other student funds come up at other schools. I don't maybe have the specific school off the top of my head, but I know like this kind of became like a little bit of a trend. So also, I mean, almost all of our like fund members are on Twitter hustling on talking about a variety of venture capital topics, and people like will see that, and so we are in that way making it more accessible. And also, I mean, the alumni of Atland like are just super successful and really great people, and so a lot of them do end up becoming venture capitalists and really important people. And so it's kind of like a positive feedback loop, which they'll talk about Atland, and people will see us. So we've built a lot of connections in kind of Midwest venture space, but also we have connections everywhere. Like, I mean, there's founders and people all over the United States that know about Atland. So yeah, I do think we are making venture more accessible. And yeah, I know we're raising second fund also to the top of your first point there. So yeah, I guess always looking for people.
I'll close this one out quickly, but as Brennan said, a lot of our alumni have gone on to do really awesome things. But I recently sat down with one, and we talked about how in a few years, she and all of her cohort that helped to start and launch Atland want to be LPs. And so it really comes full circle with us in Atland, and hopefully growing outside of Atland, that the ones who have grown this and hope the best for it long term are also going to be the ones that are going to invest from Atland. So we're really invested, hopefully, for as long as we can be around. So
really great point, Sophia. I know I would be more than happy to come back and be an LP and fund Atland for many generations to come. I know it's taught me so much, and I'm sure it's taught the rest of you so much as well. we are officially over time by 2 minutes. For those of you that stuck around till the end, really appreciate it. Really appreciate all your time being on the call with us and hope you gathered something from this conversation. If you have any more follow-up questions, I know all of our information is linked on the Twin Cities Startup Week schedule with our emails, and feel free to reach out with more questions or if you want to talk more about Atland. Thank you all so much for joining, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Shout out Ava.
Thanks, Ava.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you
Ava,
to our
for
amazing
hosting this.
panel. Of course, our amazing panel. You guys did an awesome job, and I learned so much personally from the conversation.